There we go. All right. So for everyone that's joining in today, feel free to introduce yourselves like I mentioned. Beyond that, I'm very excited to introduce Stuart and this new workshop that we have. Stuart is an extremely talented UX designer and the director of service design at AIG Insurance, and he's going to be walking through what he's learned from building IVRs. And for those of you who have not tuned in before, welcome. This is a webinar series put on by Voiceflow. We are a tool that lets people design, prototype, and build voice apps with the ultimate goal of making it possible for people to learn more, to innovate more, and ultimately create more voice experiences. Ultimately making it easier for us to democratize conversation design and development for everyone. And in this series, we've done a bunch, from interviewing thought leaders to highlighting creators and their stories, connecting business minds and futurists, but also growing with our community. And that's exactly what we want to do today. So let's get started. My name is Emily. I'm the head of growth at Voiceflow. If you have any questions, I'll be here moderating along with a few other team members that are in the audience. And I'm super excited today to introduce Stuart. Stuart, can you give us a quick intro?
Yeah, so hold on, let me go ahead and share my screen. All right, here.
All right, great.
Your beautiful screen. All right, here we go. So yeah, so my name is Stu. I'm a director of service design at AIG. I work in the annuities department, so I work on financial products. I'm an enterprise platform UX designer, so even though my title is service design and I've been working in service design for the past few years, my background is definitely as a hardcore UXer and with a specialty around platforms and enterprise. Dad, yogi, lover of all things Asian food. And like I said, I mainly work on complex systems, and in my current role, I'm working on both the consumer side and on the internal side as well. So when was the last time you actually called a company and you had a really great calling experience? And if you're like me, I would say within the past couple of years, some have actually popped up. But for the most part, you know, when you have to call a company, it's not really a great experience. You know, it's something that you dread. It's something you really don't want to do. It's kind of that option of last resort. So with that, you know, what I was tasked with was designing a best-in-class experience for our customers. And, you know, the thing about this was that they wanted a UX look at it, because typically what happens with these things is that it's done by a tech team, right? Where the tech team basically takes orders and says, hey, what do you want? And then comes up with something that's, it may be very functional, but it's you know, it's not based on best practices. It's not based on on what we would consider a really great user experience. So with that, our challenge was basically to create a best-in-class modern experience. And a couple of things that we had to include as part of this was obviously natural language processing, which made I'll get to how we did this a little bit later on. The Alexa skill being kind of a really great way to prototype this. We had to do intelligent routing, which means that, you know, a lot of times when you call these systems, the user is asked to press 1 or press 2 or press 3 to do certain things, and they don't always figure out what to get to the right place. So we had to basically do that for them in order to get them to the right person, get them quickly, and then and also understand what they were doing. And then also we wanted this to be like a conversation. You know, the best experiences when you start talking about an IVR or phone experience are like really, you know, are like any great voice experience where you're having a conversation with the machine and the machine is responding to you and it feels like you're talking to a real person. So, when we started talking about the process, like the first thing we had to do was there was no precedent for this internally. And personally, while I've worked in UX for many years, this was kind of a little bit of a new process for myself as well. So what we had to do was kind of use the best practices that we use from all of our background as UXers, and then try and basically apply this to the voice design process. So this started out with kind of mapping out the process where we figured out, you know, did our goal setting. We figured out a few things around like authentication and, you know, what did we want to achieve, what did success look like. We created a prototype and then, you know, testing this with users, creating that same UX design, human-centered design feedback loop that we would do with any product, and it didn't matter whether this was a, you know, an IVR or whether, you know, it's a IoT or whatever it is. It's still the same process, right? So when we started talking about this, you know, the one thing that I'm coming from this as a service designer or a UX designer, so I'm going to give you a little bit about kind of my transition. This was not my first project working in voice. I've actually built other things in voice, but they were combination of voice experiences with an actual GUI interface. So this is the first time I've actually worked in a situation where it was pure VUI. And when I started working out these challenges, there's certain things that you have when you're working with a pure voice experience that you don't have when you have the benefit of either a GUI interface or you have a combination of using voice with a mobile app or with a web experience. You don't have any visual cues. We don't have icons. We don't have color. You do have some of if you're using on the Alexa app, you have the rings and things like that. But we don't have a lot of those things at our disposal to help the user understand what's going on. We also don't have any visual representation of location. So meaning that where you are in the app, there's no breadcrumbs, there's no global navigation. It all has to be done without visually seeing these things. Confirmations are also another thing that are kind of a bit of a painful necessary evil that we have to deal with, because if somebody messes up, that the ramifications of somebody having error correction is a lot more dire within a voice experience than it is within a web experience, right? It's harder to navigate back and forth. And this is also a real-time experience, right? In web, things can jump around. It's non-linear. I can go wherever I want. When you start talking about a linear experience in real time, that impression you have to very much understand. And the other thing is that while voice has gotten a long way, it still fails, right? And people will still enter things. They have garbled voices. They have words that they're using, ways that they're phrasing. So we want to make sure that we're understanding, like we're anticipating those needs. And as soon as we detect some sort of frustration, that we address it in some sort of way. And then that also goes to kind of these utterances, which we'll get to, kind of utterances and intents. We need to program those and make sure that we've got them right when we're building these things. So as a UX UI designer or a service designer, any of those things, you're going to come to this with kind of this combination of things that you have in your back pocket that you've learned and you've refined for the years, and then stuff that's new to you, they're new skills. I found them relatively easy to kind of transition personally, but they are new things you have to learn, right? So we do have this understanding. We know about feedback, we know about error prevention and correction, we know about efficiency and kind of pacing and how to collect information and disclose information in at the right pace. Style and tone are something we've got in our back pocket. We've worked with brands and we worked with kind of how do we make something feel like it's on brand. We also know how to work with developers and presenting our work, because that's what we do, and figuring out how we're going to communicate the experience that we're trying to develop, and also using this human-centered design process, which includes prototyping things, right? We come up with a problem, we prototype a solution, we watch people use it, and then we go back and we do it all again and keep doing that. But there's some stuff that we don't have experience with. And one of them, like I'd mentioned before, was the linear and real-time experience, right? This is a real-time experience that happens in a line. It's not a kind of an asynchronous thing that can happen in pieces. This is a very linear and real-time experience. I had also mentioned the fact that fallbacks and failed recognition. How do you handle that gracefully? How do you, when you have somebody who's talking, who says something, the first time you may have a shorter prompt, but the second time you may give them a little more information. And by the third time, you may have to figure out how to get them to somebody who can help. We're also not totally used to working with scripts, although we do work with language. Working with scripts is definitely takes a little bit more time to work with. The documentation tools, while again, we have very similar things that we work with within UX, it's not exactly the same, meaning there's still a learning curve that has to happen. We'll get to intense utterances and slots for those of you who are new to VUI. Intense is basically something that the user wants to accomplish, and the utterances are the pieces of information that the things that they will say that will that will link to the intent that they're trying to accomplish. And the slots are the pieces of data that we're collecting for them that we can use within the system to say back to them, or basically they're variables, for lack of a better word. We're also going to have to deal with choosing voices and recording. So meaning this is something that's very specific to IVR. And if you are not used to, if you don't come from a creative background where you've had to do radio ads or something like this could be totally new, where you have to pick talent, you have to pick the right person, you have to pick the gender of the person, and then also record it. And then this also comes down into performance and intonation, right? How are you going to read these things off? And then also another thing that's very unique to IVR is at what point do you get this to a real person? Because ultimately what we want to do is we want to create some sort of self-contained experience where people can get most of their questions answered on their own and then transfer them to an agent, in which case they have as much information as possible. And it's done, again, after the person's already reached at the end of their rope with the automated service, right? Because part of the business challenge is we want to contain those calls and keep those calls as short as possible, and also have only the calls that need to go to an agent go to an agent. So creating a prototype. So what the first thing we did when we started out with this was we were trying to figure out, like, okay, how are we going to prototype this thing? Because ultimately writing scripts on a piece of paper was not going to achieve what we wanted to achieve. We weren't going to be able to hear it, to feel it, to try a bunch of things, to test the logic of it. It was going to be very flat on paper. So we considered actually building it within the telephony system, but that was going to be really cumbersome. Yeah.
Oh, sorry to interrupt. I'm not sure if you're moving the slides right now, but as of right now, we just see the telephone.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yes, I'm supposed to be sharing. Okay, maybe it got paused. Let's see here. Sorry about that.
It's all good.
Are you seeing the screen yet?
I still only see the shrunken screen with the two black sides.
Okay, let me see here.
Perfect. Now I see a blue one.
Okay, let me go into. Hold on.
Much better.
You go into full screen mode. Here's. Oh, okay, that doesn't work in that. Okay. That's why. Okay, well, I will circulate these slides later.
Appreciate that, Stuart. Thanks.
For everybody to see. But at any rate, I'll go through these, most of the stuff that I've already gone through, but we'll recirculate that. Sorry about that. Okay, so, all right, great. Thanks for letting me know. Okay, so the tools, like I said, so we landed on Voiceflow after doing some research, and because we figured out that we could very well emulate a voice experience, and that the Alexa skill was going to be very similar to any sort of voice experience minus the touch tones. So the touch tones were the only things that we figured, and we're like, well, we can test this without the touch tones and do a completely voice-based experience. So that's what we wound up choosing, and then we also use Sketch and InVision for kind of collaboration and mapping out prompts, mapping out data flows, all of that stuff. Although this is, I do realize that Voiceflow now offers the ability to add a lot of those things, so it'd be interesting to try that at a later date. But we actually kept those things separate, separated them out between the two of them. So first thing we did was we just started with your typical things that we would do with any UX experience, right? We started out with kind of determining what flows we were going to need to prototype, what the tasks, what were the use cases. We also needed to find out authentication criteria, which I'll get to a little bit later on. We had to find out specific conditions that were going to trigger personalized messages. So in a lot of these things, like I said, because we want these things to be very efficient, we don't want the user to have to pick a lot of items. We want them to we want it to be an intelligent enough system that we were able to know what it is that they're trying to accomplish, right? So as a result, we picked specific things that we knew that people would be calling about, and then we brought them all the way up to the top, and they would say, hey, are you calling about this piece? Well, let's get you right to the person, or get you into an automated flow, or get you the information that you need straight away from the top. We also had to do personas and segmentation, same stuff that you do again with any kind of UX UI experience. And then we mapped out the script and the flows. So we start talking about the IVR experience. What does that actually look like? So when you start talking about an IVR experience, we talk about this idea of kind of a beginning, a middle, and an end. And when we start getting to the beginning of it, this is your intro, any conditional messaging that you might have. Like, so for instance, if there is an outage, if you're experiencing really high call volume, if there's a global pandemic that is affecting your service levels. And then the other part of that is we're going to want to authenticate and identify what the course of this conversation is going to be about. And that might be, it could be like something like a social security number, or it could be something, personally identifiable, but it also could be like an order number, or it could be a tracking number. Any of those kinds of ideas, because the first thing we want to do is identify what is the context of this conversation. After that, once we've identified you, we're going to give you a personalized experience, right? Something that's going to be unique to you. That's going to be, and that could be particular menu items, or some sort of way that I identify who you are. We're going to want to have some sort of main or global menus. There's going to be these automated service microflows that we're going to branch out from our main hub, and then you're going to have these little microservices or microflows that will be for specific tasks. And then relevant messages that basically, direct you where you need to go at the right time. And then once we get to the kind of the end portion of this, we start talking about, like, does the user just hang up and they're done? Or do they need to get additional help? And if they need to get additional help, how is that transfer going to work, right? It could be a callback, right? Where you say, hey, we know you're calling from a number ending in 555. Do you want us to call you back at that number? We've got hold music. If somebody actually does opt to be on hold, what is that hold experience? Is it a drone? Is it something that gives you a sense of movement? Is it something that gives you a sense of the brand? And then also, what information is passed to that CSR? Because there's nothing that's more annoying than validating and spending your time authenticating only for a CSR to ask you the same questions. And then routing, right? Because ideally what we will have is that when I talked about that intelligent routing that happens up at front, is that we want to make sure we get to the right person to the right place. Okay. So authentication. A few ways that we can do authentication is almost all phone systems, like I said, require some sort of authentication. You're going to need to pass to an agent, or you're just going to need in order to kind of like personalize the experience. Now, like I said, a few ways that we can do this is kind of an ANI, which is your caller ID. You can basically use that as one of your points of authentication to personalize the experience. It could be a web transfer, meaning if the user is on the web, or if it's a callback from the web, it could be a callback from a mobile app. It could be that once you've got that, you can automatically assume who that person is and personalize that experience. It could be more of a social, it can be an order number, an account number, a card number. Any of those ways are things that we can use to kind of have people identify. And when we're talking about authentication, we want to make sure that most of these authentication pieces are not things that people have to go and look up, but basically stuff that they already know off the top of their head. So I talked a little bit about the kind of the integration with other digital products. And one of the things that we want to talk about is to consider that experience, right? If somebody's just making a phone call into the call center and I'm just calling the call center, straight away, that's one thing. But we can tailor that experience if we know that they're coming from the mobile app, or we know that they're coming from the web, right? If you use, so for instance, a callback feature on the web, where you can say request a callback on the web, and then you call back, you can find out who that person is. We can hopefully get some of their context, what pieces of information they've used, where they've visited on the web, what page they're on. We can pass some of that information on to our customer care rep so that they can get down to the brass tacks of saying, okay, I know who you are. Thanks for calling, Stuart. What can I help you with? And that's going to make a much better personalized experience overall, right? So one of the other things we want to talk about is caller intent, right? Because when I talked about that idea of intelligent routing, of getting the right person to the right place, as we go through these prompts, we want to make sure that we're capturing the caller intent. So as you go through the journey, whenever you finally get to the end of the journey, you should be able to map where you're going to capture those caller intents at. Like what actions is somebody going to take that will tell you that this is what they're trying to achieve and where they need to go. This may have to do something with skills routing, and in most organizations it does. It has to do with, because not all CSRs have the same skills, and they can't do the same things. So within your organization, you want to find out is what will I need in order to be able to route them to the right place. And then the other thing is that if something's taken place, that we want to let them know kind of that we're confirming that we know where they're going, right? So we've talked about intents, we've kind of talked about authentication. So once we get to that, we start talking about kind of flows. And you know, what we did here was, this is an example of kind of just the deliverable that I use to kind of, you know, a sample of kind of how you might want to map some of these things out. You know, mapping out the prompts, and then also mapping out what in your prototype that you're using, what kind of utterances you may be using, just to kind of work through the problem, I found very helpful. And then the other thing is that you'll see here, I've mapped out kind of where I'm capturing each of these, those data points that I talked about for the intelligent routing. So when we're also talking about kind of the other pieces of this of mapping, or kind of what we're going to need for our prototype, we're going to also start talking about voice and intents, utterances, and slots. So I mentioned earlier, so the intent is what the user is trying to accomplish. So when we're doing our mapping, we want to make sure that we map out each of our intents to kind of a flow, right? Meaning, once somebody says, oh, I would like to select get a form flow, I need to basically map that, and then map all of the kind of the microflows that go along with that. The utterances are kind of like within Voiceflow. What we wound up doing was mapping all of our utterances within Voiceflow. And that's what we use to kind of check and see what kinds of things that we might want to say within our prototype that would that obviously indicate that somebody is trying to intend to do something, right? The slots are these variables that the user speaks that can be used for verification or within the system. So for instance, like if I said, you know, I'd like to select I'd like to hear the values for my account, right? You can say, you said values, right? Or you said the values of my account. Whatever they said, those slots are those things that we're going to, that is exactly what they say, that we're going to reuse within the confines of the script. And then variables are other things we're going to use within to keep track of what's going on in the system. But these are, there's a little bit of gray area between slots and variables, in the fact that kind of slots are variables that are typically used within the context of the conversation, and variables are things that we keep track of within the prototype that are not really used within the context of the conversation. Okay, so language and script. So when we start talking about the menus and prompts, right? What we want to do is we want to make sure that we're not too long and we're not too short, right? Because if you go too long on these things, people are sitting waiting around, and typically users are like, can you just get to the point? I really want you to just say, can I just speak? I know what I want to say, right? So, but by the same token, if you have something that's too short, the user may not get enough feedback as to what they want, right? So what we want to do is balance that. We want to play with the ideas of too long and too short, but we also want to play with a couple of other continuums that we're talking about, right? Is it too casual or too formal? You may find that your brand is, if you're talking about like Apple, or you're talking about like T-Mobile, you can go a lot more of a casual brand. If you're talking about a financial company, institution, it may need to go a lot more formal, right, in terms of your conversation. So you're going to want to balance that, right, and what your brand is. But in any way, whatever you're going to want to do, you're going to want to make sure that it feels conversational, even if it's formal or if it's casual. So, and once we start getting into performance, right, like how this is actually read, like how do we kind of communicate that information? Ultimately, more often than not, you're going to deal with voice performance, right? Because typically what happens with these things is that you record all of the voice prompts with an actual person. You don't use TTS to do these all of the time. And you're going to want to make sure that you've got the right voice talent that voice talent is representative of your brand? Is it somebody who sounds like I said, if you're talking about somebody who's very casual, do you have somebody who's very casual, who talks very kind of, like your friend is talking to you? Or do you have somebody who's talking very formal, much more like a salesperson or a, somebody at a bank might talk to you, and everything in between. So you've got to make sure that the voice talent is representative of that. And then also, how is that going to integrate with your text-to-speech? Because if you have things like names or specific products or things that are not very typical that you can't reuse over and over again, you're going to need to record every single one of those things, or you're going to need to integrate your text-to-speech. So if I want to say your name, if I want to say, hi, Stuart, that's something that I'm probably going to have to be used with text-to-speech versus having recording everybody else's name. So you're going to want to figure out how you're going to blend those pieces together. And then you're going to also decide like what kind of gender of speaker, because there's a big difference in terms of how a male comes off and how a female comes off. And they have very different feels, and you have to just choose which is the right one for your brand. And if you start looking across like telephone systems, you'll find that there's no right answer to this. You'll find that there's some brands that do male speakers, and there's some brands that do female speakers. And I would say that more often than not, more use female speakers than male speakers. It is really split down the center. It really comes down to what feels right for your brand or your project. Error correction. So we're talking about, mistakes in navigation are time consuming. Obviously we don't, this guy here, he's pretty frustrated with his phone, phone experience, but we want to offer the option to kind of correct as people make mistakes. So repeating automated prompts is a good one. Universal access to a main menu or representative. So meaning if somebody is detecting that they're getting frustrated, the first thing they'll say operator, or they'll say representative or something like that. And we want to make sure that those are global prompts or global intents that we have, that basically if somebody says, I want to get to a representative, I'm done with the automated service, we can get them out of there. And then the other thing is to plan for system fails, repeated failures, and progressive information and fallbacks. So that means that, so what happens is if I make an error the first time, I may be mildly frustrated. By the second time, I'm a little more frustrated. By the third time, I'm pretty darn frustrated and I'm kind of over it. So, voice systems fail for all kinds of reasons, right? They don't understand it. Anybody who has an Alexa has experienced all the fun things that it's told you back as to what it thinks you have said on your shopping list or otherwise. So these things are going to fail. And so what we need to do is to plan these failures elegantly. And so the first prompt may be something short and sweet, maybe like, so how can I help you today? And then the second prompt may say, oh, I didn't quite get that, but you can try to say withdrawals or account values or any of those things and give them some progressive help here. And then by the third or fourth time, we just say, okay, forget it. We're not going to even let you sit through this IVR anymore. We're just going to get you to a person and have them help you because there's obviously a problem. And basically, by the time you get to that third prompt, that's my rule of thumb, is if something fails by third time, don't put them through any more agony. And then testing with users. So once we get into this kind of idea of testing with users, there, on the Voiceflow application, we found a couple of ways that we could do it. One of them is to upload it to an Alexa app and get somebody's email, and then basically have them do it on their own Alexa app, which is a good way to do it because you can actually get them to a pretty, clear prototype, and then they can actually feel it and works pretty, more like the real thing. The other thing is that is the web version of the interface, or you can do it through the phone. That's the other thing, is basically where you have a phone and you hold it up to your mic system and have them speak into it while you have your Alexa app on your own phone while you do that. Both of those seem to work pretty well overall. So you could do either way. The other way is to do it through the web interface of Voiceflow, but that is kind of, it can introduce usability issues with people hitting the space bar and not getting the right information, and then your usability results can be interfered with that, or can have some challenges with that. And then if you get to the point where you have a developer or you're working with one, you might be able to take all your intents and everything and create an Amazon Connect prototype. Amazon Connect is the telephone system that Amazon uses, and a lot of this stuff can be just reprogrammed with there's still a level of effort there if you've got a really good developer, but you might want to pair with a developer on that if you need to test things like touch tones and a lot of that, if that's crucial to your design. So if we hold on for 1 second, I need to grab my phone and I will be back and I will we'll give you some demos on how all of this stuff works. Give me 1 second. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do Apple, and then I'm going to do T-Mobile, and these are basically the experiences that these companies have, which will give you a little bit of an idea of kind of how these experiences could be, can play out, and I'll tell you kind of how they operate. So here we go.
Welcome to Apple. Your call may be recorded for quality assurance. I'm an automated system that can handle complete sentences. So tell me, how can I help you today?
I have a question about my iPad.
Are you calling for product information or to make a purchase? iTunes or App Store have a technical support question, or are you calling about a recent iPad order?
Technical support question.
Okay, I'll get you right over to our technical support department. Apple support calls are recorded for evaluation and training. To securely verify your identity, I'd like to send a consent notification to your Apple devices. Do I have your permission to do that?
Yes.
Okay, I've sent the message. I see you recently purchased an iPad. Is that the product you're calling about today?
Yes.
Great, thanks. After you're finished with the advisor, we'd like to text you a link to a brief survey so you can tell us how we did. Carrier data rates may apply. Would you like to take the survey?
Yes.
I see you're calling from a number ending in 9016. Is that the mobile phone where you'd like us to text a link to the survey?
Yes.
Thank you. I'll send you a text for the survey in a moment. Thank you for contacting Apple support. Please hold for an Apple advisor. Apple is happy to offer a choice of music while you wait. For a selection of modern popular music, press 1. For classical, 2. For jazz, 3. If you prefer to wait in silence, press 4.
Okay. All right. So there's a bunch of things that happen here that are good examples of kind of like what I talked about previously and kind of demonstrate some of these ideas. So you'll see that they authenticated me. They knew kind of who I was already, but they also authenticated me through an iOS phone prompt, which was actually really cool. You can hear me saying "rad" in the background because when I recorded this, I was like, wow, this is actually pretty cool. But they actually authenticate you by sending you a message on your phone that you can basically, validate. They knew why I was calling. They knew that I'd bought an iPad recently. The tones were really great in terms of a conversational tone. There were some prompts that were disguised as questions instead of like keying in numbers. They said, are you calling about technical support or about a question about your iPad? And those are basically the ways that you can kind of disguise these kind of prompts by asking a question and making it feel very much like I'm just asking you a conversation, right? They did offer this kind of survey and confirm the text address. That I felt was, it felt a little bit long, especially when you're on the phone call waiting for those things. So, picking that, those are things that probably could have been done, executed a little better. But it also mentioned it can accept sentences and then offered a selection of hold music, which is a nice little touch where you can decide whether you want to do, classical or Bach music or whatever. So T-Mobile is another one, and just a little bit of kind of context for T-Mobile is that this comes through the mobile app. And remember when I talked about this idea of kind of remembering context? So this is a really great one of understanding that you'll see here when I go through this that they've already pre-authenticated me. They don't need to put me through any sort of authentication because I basically came in right through the app. They knew who I was, they knew my phone number, and they said, hey, I'm just gonna jump right into it. So you'll hear this, that basically that they just get right into it and say, great, how can I help you?
Thank you for calling T-Mobile. To ensure the health and safety of our employees, we've temporarily reduced our hours of operation to 4 a.m. to 9 p.m. Pacific time. We'll be available 24/7 again as soon as possible. In the meantime, you can check your balance, make payments, and complete other self-service requests through our automated phone system or by using our Apple website. We appreciate your patience and understanding, and thank you for being a valued customer. Okay, so tell me, what can I help you with today?
Check my balance.
Account balance. Okay, let me help you with that. Right now, you owe $120. You have a recurring monthly charge for your rate plan, plus all applicable taxes in the amount of $110. And it's due June 9th. We got a payment from you on May 7th. It was for $120. To hear that again, say repeat that. To view more detailed records, check out the free T-Mobile app. Otherwise, what would you like to do? Make a payment or start over?
Start over.
Okay, starting over. Briefly, what else can I help you with? For example,
Modify my service.
Okay, rate plans and features. Just a moment while I look that up. Okay, for this phone, you're currently on the 2 lines TMobile all-in-pro mode plan, which includes unlimited whatever minutes for $110 per month and includes applicable taxes. You can easily view or modify your rate plan or features via the T-Mobile app. To hear about your current plan and features, say, "Here are my details." To speak to a representative about plan or feature changes, say, "Change my plan."
Change
For
my
anything
plan.
else, say, "Start over."
Change my plan.
We've made some exciting changes to our rate plans. So for a time, rate plan and feature changes will be handled by an expert. Just a moment while I transfer you. For verification, please enter or say your passcode, or say, "I don't have it." That number didn't match my records. Let's try again. Please enter or say your passcode. I didn't get that. Please enter that passcode again. To do something else, say "Start over." Okay, got it. We care about your experience, so we may record this call.
Okay, lots of stuff there. And, you know, a lot of things that happened, again, all these things that I talked about earlier, I'm going to kind of go through a little bit of kind of what they were doing here. So they pre-authenticated me based on my telephone. They introduced with kind of current events saying, "Hey, we're a little bit, we're short-staffed right now because of COVID, you know, bear with us." They also pointed the users to the web, give them an option saying, "Hey, if you don't want to wait online, these are things available on the web," just in case you didn't remember. It's all touch tone, no voice, even though I was able to key things in. Everything was based on this kind of idea of just saying everything. The conversational tone was excellent. The guy who they have is really, it felt like you're talking to somebody, not having to basically interact with hitting 1s, 2s, and 3s on a phone system. They were able to transfer after the automated service, like they asked me to do that, and that's the point which they asked me to do that authentication, right? Where they said, "This is where we're going to finally authenticate you to make sure that if you're going to change your rate plan, we're getting the authentication." They did use a little bit of a mix of TTS and voice, which was really slick because they did it it was very seamless. And then the other thing is that you notice that as I made errors, I made a progressive error. They had error correction and fallback, right? The first time they said, "I didn't really catch that. Why don't you try again? If you want a list of options, you know, say that." And then the last time they said, you know, "You want to start over?" So they're giving me that idea to kind of give me the progressive help as we go through it. And they also, at the end of the automated service, they offered me the option to talk to a representative live. So that's kind of it, you know, and basically this is the kind of the steps in the process and kind of each of the items that you might need to do in each of them, you know, again, setting goals and objectives, mapping use cases, authentication, flows, error correction, and fallbacks. This is kind of in the mapping phase. You've got this, you've got this prototyping where you're going to, you know, determine out your utterances, intents. You're going to talk about your menu prompts, any sort of data mapping and intelligent routing that you need to do. You're going to pick your gender and how you're going to do your TTS and what the kind of the recording scheme is going to go, and then also figure out the pacing and intonation of the overall experience. And then once you've got the testing, you know, again, you can use Alexa, Amazon Connect, or some sort of web interface to be able to test these things. And that is it. So I'll open it up for questions at this point.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stuart. I'm just going to share my screen so then that way we can go through some of the questions that people have asked.
Sure, let me stop sharing.
Awesome. And again, guys, feel free to use the Q&A function. We'll be going through those now. All right, so the first one that we have up here is, let me just move my chat screen, it is right over it. How do you offer scalability, aka thousands of intents, to organizations with recording voice compared to using text-to-speech providers?
Scalability, is there somebody else can clarify that? How do you offer scalability to organizations with recorded and voice versus, text-to-speech? Okay, so yeah, that is a challenge, right? Meaning, because, so again, the text-to-speech can be recorded on a regular, or you can change things on the fly, right? You just change the type of it, and then it reads it right back to you. And then the other thing is that if you have to get things recorded, then you have to send them out to a voiceover artist, have them record it, send it back to you, and it's really slow, and it can take at least a day or two. And you know, I think that that's where you have to just figure out in your organization and how you can seamlessly blend those ideas together to be able to provide an experience where, like, let's say if your requirements are that you need to do text to, or you need to provide a lot of data that requires text to speech or requires a quick delivery of text to speech type options, you're going to need to build that into your design. And that could be by kind of what voice do you choose for your voiceover artist? Can you pick a Lex voice or a voice that will basically blend with that, some sort of text to speech that will basically blend with that seamlessly, so that you can it's not noticeable. Like I said, on T-Mobile, they had it and you didn't even notice it because they had a really nice text to speech transition. So that's going to be it. Or if you have some sort of way for you to kind of do these quickly, where you go and you have to get them recorded and get them, but that's never quick. So I mean, I think the better way to do this is figure out how you're going to blend it and where can you just use recorded voice, and then where you need to use the text to speech and make it seamless in some sort of fashion.
Awesome, thank you. The next one we have is, what pain points of IVR can be addressed by multimodal voice or touch? So using, let's say, screens like you had mentioned, or other devices.
Well, so the thing about, like, when you have a multimodal situation, there's a couple of things that happens. Like in my experience in doing that, is that you've got a visual representation of kind of where you are, or you can give more detailed information, right? So if I have, like, let's say I've asked for something, and then I get a screen that basically tells me where I'm at, but it also gives me more detailed information on it. That kind of, those two items working together lowers the cognitive load. So when we're talking about just like a pure IVR, right, you don't have any of those pieces. So things that can help are kind of, getting them the right information that visually reinforces what they have, what they've asked for, and may give them a better experience for them to scroll through and see how that see some additional information. And then also visual cues, right? Meaning possibly another option for them to kind of jump in, or to see where they can, opt in to initiate that voice again. Those are a few ideas that you can, things that can help with that multimodal type of experience.
Great. Another one that comes up, and this is something that even I have to clarify when I talk to a human, because my last name has this as well, but how do you account for errors such as M or N? How do you ensure that this is accurate? Do you use your own text-to-speech, or perhaps like other services?
Yeah, and that again is always a challenge, right? And especially if you've got those kinds of things, and we've had all kinds of issues with those errors as well. And I mean, the question is you build it into your design, right? Meaning that if you know that people are going to have issues like saying M's and N's and saying these challenges, and they have to read back like their account number, and you've got letters or numbers. We've had a challenge working within Lex and trying to get those numbers within the Alexa scale to get those numbers to read. Yeah, and I think that the answer is that you basically build it into the design of the application. And again, that's where I start talking about progressive enhanced information as you go through the process, right? First time I just say, hey, I give you a little bit more information, but by the time I get to that second or third time and I see that that's failing, that's where I'm going to want to just hand you off to a person and get that, because you don't want to put people through that stuff if the technology is not working, and it's not perfect right now.
There was a follow-up that actually came through in a DM. Out of curiosity, if let's say you're asking for somebody's username and that username is like, let's say if it was my name, it was Emily Linetto with like no space or E Linetto. Do you normally try to get people to say those usernames, or is that typically easier to type in?
Yeah, no, and I mean, if you're talking about a pure IVR, I would shy away from that, and even asking people like name lookups and things like that, they can be extremely problematic. Like, let's say, like, so you got the name Linetto, right? I'm not sure if Alexa would actually pick that up, right, and translate that. So again, it's better for you to figure out other ways to kind of solve that problem. If you know that it's going to fail, what else can you use? What other pieces of information can you use that might? Maybe it's a phone number, maybe it's an account number, something along those lines, where you don't have to have people read off things like email addresses and their names and all of those kinds of things, because they can be problematic for validation purposes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The next one is how, and also how often do you gather feedback on your IVR experiences? What does that look like?
Okay, so I will say this. I will say that again, that this is because I'm transferring from years of working in UX, and I'll give you my kind of things. And the IVR is a little bit more of I will say it's a little bit of a newer thing for me personally. But I think that the feedback loop works the same, meaning, you know, an experience is an experience is an experience. And you gather feedback when it makes sense for you to gather feedback. I know that's a great area, but that said, I always gather feedback as soon as I've got something that I think that needs to be tested. Is basically as soon as is kind of the answer. So if you have a bunch of unknowns in your process, you say, well, if you go through your process and you say, well, I don't know the answer to this, I don't know the answer to this, I don't know if people will use this language in the test, I don't know if this intent or this utterance is going to work here, do I have all my utterances, all that kind of stuff. You know, that's the point at which you start testing, right? And you collect feedback. And the idea is that if you have a tool like Voiceflow, it's been really easy for us to iterate on these things. And if you've got a feedback loop where you can basically deploy a test, you have a, you know, user Zoom, user testing, whatever you've got available for you to do your testing, and you can deploy those things, then feedback's really easy. You write a script, you know, you have your thing, you set up a moderated interview, and you do your testing, getting feedback whenever you need it.
Awesome. Yeah, I can definitely tell the inner UX coming in there. You were quite ready with a good format of going through that. So I think in summary for that, it's always great to just start testing the second that you can, because that's where all the learning is going to come from.
Yeah, and especially like the thing about feedback. So the other thing about kind of that I've learned about with voice is that one of the challenges is going to be your utterances, right, and your language. Because so if I have in a UI, I have something that I can use a piece of language and I can use an icon to kind of reinforce that, especially like I'm using branded language. I can also use it by context, right? And tell you where based on where you are, you may understand a piece of language or a design or kind of how to navigate based on that. That's what I was talking about, those visual cues, right? Whereas when you're in a VUI experience, it's like language is king. So language tests are great to understand kind of what do people understand in terms of the language. Like if you ask somebody and you give them a definition, or you tell them a word and say, what is this word, or what word would you use to express this? You can start to collect those pieces almost like a card sort, or like an open-ended card sort, where you can basically get that understanding of what language they're going to use and put those into the prompts, and then put them into your utterances as well, so that they can, you know, so that failure rate is a lot less.
That's a really good tip in basically building outside of our own perspectives when it comes to synonyms. That's definitely very, very important. I actually realized there's a few more questions that are in the Q&A that I did not get a chance to put in slides yet, so we'll go through those. But the first one is, what's the usual go-to, let's say, live representative rate, or what is kind of expected with an IVR? How many people stick to the system as a whole?
Yeah, okay, so general containment rate, so like industry standard, what's called containment rate. And containment rate is something where the user has their own experience and is not transferred to a customer care rep. So ideally, this is that automated service where, like, if you just want to check your balance, you can check your balance and then move on. Typical containment rate is anywhere from 20 to 25%. That's kind of industry standard, depending upon your audience. So yeah, so that's where you're going to want to shoot for. So if you have containment rates that are like, meaning you have containment rates that are lower than that, then you've got some room to grow. And if you've got containment rates higher than that, then you're doing pretty darn good.
The other questions that we have in here seem to be a little bit more geared towards Alexa, though from my understanding, your IVR system runs on a separate platform. Is that correct?
Well, the end product does, but the prototyping, I've been using Alexa basically for prototyping on it. So I don't know if I can answer it. I will.
Okay, we will try there. I guess in the context of prototyping, is there a particular reason why you chose Alexa? Are there any kind of pros or cons for that?
Yeah, versus using Google, meaning for prototyping, Google Voice. Yeah, I chose Alexa because that's the engine that is going to be powering the TTS that we're going to be using ultimately. So the platform we're using is called Genesis, and that is tied to Alexa. So we wanted to get something as close to as possible. Now, on the other projects I've actually used Google, and Google, in my experience, the Google works better if you're integrating something with a, if you're doing multimodal type of experience. That the Google actually worked better for us because we prototyped both of those things. But again, that was the main reason why I chose to use an Alexa skill versus using Google.
Awesome. I guess like with that kind of tying the theme of testing as well as doing prototyping in Alexa, how do you normally generate your list of testers? Is that your internal team? Is there external places that you go?
Well, I use the same sources that you would use for any sort of a BUI type of, any sort of UI type of testing. So meaning, there's usertesting.com, there's respondent.io, there's all these different ways that you can recruit users depending upon your organization. And then basically you can do it through one of a couple ways. I mean, you can do it through the same platforms. Like let's say if you're using a look back or you're using a Validately or something like that, you can just record it just like any other kind of interview, or you can even use Zoom, or you can use WebEx or whatever video sharing platform, and then you just record the interview. You take it back and then you analyze it just like you would analyze any other kind of experience.
Awesome. And lastly, I think this one might be a little bit more in tune with Alexa and the naming structure there, but kind of curious if there are any naming schemes or any personalization tips that you have for building IVR for, let's say, an individual user. I know you pointed out a few things with Apple where it was able to kind of pull a lot of information before you gave it. Are there any other tips that you would recommend?
Yeah, so there's actually a couple of things. So one of the things that you're going to find is a real challenge is and I talked about this before, it kind of going back to that TTS, is how do you personalize something and use the recorded voice? There's a huge difference between using TTS and then using the recorded voice. It's going to be like a night and day. Like both of those examples that I gave you were actually recorded people who they've done the recording and they're doing a playback of all the prompts and everything. Much better experience, and most experiences you're going to get are going to be that. So when you start talking about personalization, one of the things that you start talking about is name, right? One way to really start to get people to do that is if you can seamlessly blend your voice and any way to intersect it, to put the names in there, that's going to be a challenge. You're just going to have to, there's no real good way to do it. You're just going to have to try and error and try and find a voice, a TTS voice that's going to match your recorded voice seamlessly. And those two are going to just play nicely with one another. The other thing is that you're going to want to look at the reasons why people call the most frequently, right? So so in our case, like I said, account values was one of the things. And I mean, and this is the case with a lot of IVRs, is people call and they check and they say, what's my account value? Or if they have an event, right? So for instance, if you've got like something that's happened, if somebody's calling, if you know that you send somebody a notice that to update their information or to opt into something, whatever that piece of information is, if you have that available and you can start that at the very top of the experience, that's going to be your best practice. So I would start by figuring out what are my top 5 reasons that people call, and can I prompt them at the very beginning of that without having them sit through any menus or asking what they're here to call for, and anticipate and say, oh, by the way, I know I saw you bought an iPad. Are you interested? Are you calling us about your iPad? They knew I already bought something, and that's the reason why I'm calling. So anyway, those are the things that I would consider: blend of text to speech, and then also can you anticipate your top 5 reasons for calling or more, depending upon how complex your system is.
Cool. And this is a question that I'm kind of curious of. I know as someone like yourself who has that research background and has a keen eye for UX, what are some other places that you go to kind of to either look at good examples of IVR UX, or maybe you have some other examples that might be fun for people in the audience to check out?
Well, so the answer is I haven't found them. So if there's somebody who actually has a really good, it's really interesting. So this industry has been kind of typically handled by phone people, right? So this is typically handled by a BA who runs kind of a phone system, and they'll have like some sort of background. So they're not typically designers. And as a result, it's been very hard to find anything more than, I would say, general best practices on IVR. This is the reason why I created this presentation, was out of my own frustration of looking and doing a bunch of research and finding anything more than just kind of, hey, here's some best practices that we all know that are kind of, yeah, duh, because we've all called enough people, we've all called enough companies to see kind of what we know, right? So I haven't found any really great uses, any really great places to kind of standardize all of these things. But what I have found is that if you call the companies that I think that are doing it really well, that I've seen, so Apple and T-Mobile were ones that I think are doing a really great job. I mean, Amex is doing a really great job, and Discover is also doing a really great job. I would say that those are kind of the four that I found that are really doing a really nice job. My recommendation is call anybody that you can that is known for being a good customer service brand, right? Apple is known for being a good customer service brand. Anybody who has a really great, they'll probably have a decent experience on their phone. They may have a great experience, but they're not gonna forget that piece. Although one exception is Disney, who wants to transfer you straight to an agent right away when I call them up, and their experience is very still old school, but they want to give you a white glove experience. So there you go.
Well, I'm also going to link this for everybody who doesn't know. Stuart also released a Medium article that talks about IVR practices, so I'll definitely be sure to link that in our follow-up with the recording as well. But I want to take a moment to quickly thank you so much for joining, Stuart. This has been really, really amazing. I know you just shared a ton of wisdom with us, but do you have any parting one-liners for us to think on?
You test, build and test.
It's always a good rule of thumb, especially in this type of space. Great. So for those of you in the audience, we have a ton more events like this, and this recording, I promise you, will be coming to you guys soon. We have another really great session with Nico coming up next week. We have our community AMA with Braden, and we also have a workshop coming up on how no code can impact and be important for all ages. So this will be talking about the impact that it's had on kids as well as older generations, hosted by one of the community leads at Voiceflow. So definitely come and check that out if you're interested as well. And if you're not already part of it, please join in the discussion in our community. We'd love to hear feedback on what you guys want to see more of, or anything that you have in terms of questions about what's happening today. And thanks again, Stuart, and thanks everyone in the audience. If you want to check out the recording for this event as well as future events, it will be posted at voiceflow.com/events. And we'll see you guys next time.
All right, thank you. Have a good day, everybody.
Thanks, guys.